Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and we are welcoming in this episode Edo Van Belkhom. He is an award-winning and award-nominated author in the horror and speculative fiction genre, if that's one genre. Maybe a little sci-fi in there as well. I mean, when I talk about awards, I'm talking about awards. The Stoker Award, nominated a second time for a Stoker Award, received an Aurora Award, which is for speculative fiction in Canada. And he's celebrating or commemorating the 25th anniversary of his compilation of short stories that he published, I guess, when you were 36 years old, if I read that correctly.
I don't know how old I was, I guess. 36, 1998.
Well, they compared you to a young Stephen King at some point in time. And also you wrote a book or a story called Wolfpack, which Sarah Michelle Gellar from Buffy the Vampire Slayer fame was in.
Yeah, there's a whole story there. I'm sure we'll get to that.
Excellent. All right. Well, you know what? This is probably a good time for me to turn it over to you. I mean, I guess you can tell folks where you grew up and, what got you into this and how you had the itch of doing this. A few photos of you in a big rig. So obviously you were a trucker at some point and transitioned to author. So there's...
No, that photo was just for the book. There's a funny story with that too. We needed an author's photo for the book, Death Drives a Semi. So it was like, well, why don't we be inside of a truck? So my wife and I, we drove around like the industrial area of town and found a truck repair shop and walked right in and said, this is going to sound crazy, but you mind if I sit in one of your trucks and we take a few pictures?
Okay, so...
And they said, just don't show the company name on the door and it'll be all right. So that's what we did.
So it was, but Death Drives a Semi, not an autobiography.
No. Actually, the story Death Drives a Semi in that collection is a little autobiographical. I lived in Brampton, Ontario, which is northwest of Toronto. And for several years, I was a sports reporter at a daily newspaper in Cambridge, Ontario. So I was driving an hour on the 401, our big highway in Canada, Trans-Canada Highway. An hour there, an hour back. So every 8-hour day was 10 hours. And one time I was driving back home, 3 o'clock in the morning, and this truck passed me, and I looked up, and the whole cab seemed to be glowing, and I couldn't see a driver behind the wheel. So that's I came up with the idea for Death Drives a Semi. So not autobiographical, but like most of the stories, they all came from some experience I had in my life.
It's a little bit like Ghost Riders in the storm, or Ghost Riders in the sky, but there was a ghost driver on the 401.
Correct.
All right. So what was your first breakout work?
Okay, so I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what kind of writing I wanted to do. So, like most teenagers, we goofed around with a bunch of things. I wrote some really bad poetry, tried to write some rock songs. Me and this other guy, we wrote some songs. We weren't musically inclined. We didn't play instruments or anything, but we were writing songs. And we called ourselves The Attitude,
okay,
which was a cool name. But we had really shitty songs, so that wasn't going to be it. And so one summer I was reading Ray Bradbury's The October Country, and it's 20 short stories in there. And after reading every one of the stories, I just thought, man, that was so cool. And, read the next one. That was awesome. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to write stories like that. I want to write stories where someone could read them and say, wow, that was fantastic. Pretty lofty goal.
Yeah, Ray Bradbury.
And that's when I knew I had to work harder at that than anything I'd done previously, because I was never a very really good student. Always good enough to get C's and middling grades, not working too hard at it. But I knew that if I wanted to be a writer like that, there's thousands of people that want that, hundreds that are willing to do the work. So I'd have to work as hard on that as anything I'd ever done in my life, and that's what I set out to do. It took me about 5-6 years. I joined a group called the Cecil Street Irregulars, which was a writer's circle, and we critiqued about 2 stories every week. That was in Toronto on the Cecil Street Community Center. So we'd hand in our stories and then read them, come back and critique them. I did that solid for 2 years, every week critiquing 2 stories. And some other published authors came out of that. Carl Schrader, Cory Doctorow, although he was there after I left. David Nickel, a friend of mine, collaborator on the Bram Stoker winning story, Rat Food. But it came time to leave there because we had written Rat Food, and one of the members said, "Oh, is this supposed to be scary?" It didn't scare me at all, and we thought, "Fuck you! That's a scary story. That is a terrifying story." And we were right. We won the Stoker Award, and that's when I knew it was time to leave, because it was getting personal and a little antagonistic, and it wasn't being honest.
Right.
So then after that, you stay with the people that you respect their opinion, and you show them your work and that sort of thing. So I know I'm rambling here, but I know we have lots of time. So
yeah,
cut me off if I'm going on too long. But you asked the open-ended question, and I'm just filling it in as best I can. So you asked about the first break, which was quite incredible. Really lucky for me. I was working as a sports reporter at the paper here in Brampton, the Brampton Times daily newspaper, and I actually wrote the story on the company's computer because I didn't really have a computer at the time. And it was called Baseball Memories, and it was about a man who loves baseball trivia and learns and crams so much trivia and numbers into his head that his brain decides, well, these are the most important things. They have to be, because that's all we're getting.
Right.
So we got to get rid of some other information and make some more room for this numbers and stuff. So he forgets everything except anything to do with baseball, and had trouble finding a place for it. And eventually it was published by a magazine called Athlon, a literary magazine, published at East Tennessee State University. Like, how obscure can you get? And I wasn't satisfied with just that, so I sent the story to Carl Edward Wagner, who edited at the time, Year's Best Horror Stories, and he accepted it.
All right.
So it was like my first short story was reprinted in Year's Best Horror Stories. Like, holy cow! It's like, I give the analogy of being a major league hitter and first at bat, home run, and try to do it on the second time or the third and fourth, and it's just not going to happen. So, I kept writing and submitting stories, and they'd get rejected. One or two here, I'd sell and publish, but it took a long time to get really good or professional. There, you get put out a professional product every time.
And make a living.
And eventually that's what happened. The more I was writing, I'd publish a couple more stories, and eventually that led to novels.
So,
okay, you're all up to date to that point.
Okay. So, when did you know that it was going to be scary stuff, that horror stories was sort of like your first love?
Well, like I said, the exposure to Ray Bradbury, right? So he's writing science fiction. And so I thought, I'm going to write science fiction, but realized at some point that I didn't really have the head for it, for science.
Mm-hmm.
And, Ray Bradbury's science fiction is like they took a rocket to this planet, and
right.
He doesn't worry about all the details and the actual physics of everything, And so science fiction really wasn't for me. And I got to the point where I could write a good story that was set in the present day in our real world, but just had one or two slight things that do with fantasy with it. And that's where I found my niche, that I could write about the present day, but just with a hint of fantasy. And that's what I started to do. And then when you start to do something and you get good at it, it's more fun to do. And the more fun it is to do, the more you do of it. The more you do of it, the better you get, the more fun it is to do. So that's where I started down the road that way. But I had some other travels. Like many people in science fiction and fantasy circles and authors, I did a stint as a writer of erotica, or some might say pornography, for men's magazines. I did a lot of that. I did about 50 stories for a bunch of men's magazines. And, people laugh at that, but it was one of the best educational processes because, people had to have sex and there had to be that in it, but the stories had to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, definite parts of that. People had to know what was going on at every moment. You couldn't be obscure about it and everything. And they had to be a certain length. And, there's all kinds of things that once you're doing it, you're getting good practice at it because you have to fit all of those things into your story. And, it has to be kind of believable and, and all of those things. So I did a lot of that. And I got out of it after a while because after so many years, it became kind of boring, first off. And also when I show people my work, I'd show them like, oh, look, this was in Year's Best Horror. And then you show them a couple of the magazines that your stories are in, like, oh my God, let me see that. And they get all excited about that. And like,
right.
I got to use a pseudonym for this because this isn't, where I wanted to be. It was a great educational thing, but, it's not the thing that you hang up on your wall, like, as for your proudest moment. So I did, learned a lot and started writing professionally and getting things published. And after a while, I was on my way.
Did you ever, people compare you to a young Stephen King. Was Stephen King an influence of yours?
Not exactly, because he's a much better writer than I am, but I'll put that in context. I remember when I was starting out, Stephen King had done Carrie and the Shining and The Stand and things. He was very early in his career, and he was getting a lot of notice, a lot of notoriety. And it was like, I got to read some of this. So I think I picked up Carrie or whatever. And I remember lying in bed, at night reading it. And I mentioned to my wife, I said, whatever this guy's getting, all the accolades and everything, he deserves it because this is terrific. This is fantastic stuff. So to be compared to Stephen King, wow, that's very flattering. And what else? It's the obvious comparison. Somebody is up and coming. Oh, they compare like that. That's fine. Anytime you can get your name mentioned with somebody of that stature, it's a real feather in your cap. But he wasn't the big influence. And I remember reading some later stories of his, and there would be this guy up on a ladder. And I would just say there was this guy up on a ladder. But he starts telling you, like 3 years ago, he bought the house. And he goes into all this detail. And then, 6 pages later, the guy's up on the ladder.
Right.
So I was a lot more direct, more quick. People would say, oh, my characters weren't so well drawn and things like that. It's probably true. But influences. I said Ray Bradbury and contemporaries of his. One being Richard Matheson. Great writer, great short story writer. Wrote a lot of television episodes. A lot of his novels have been adapted into feature films and into television episodes as well. And one of my all-time favorites, Robert Bloch, who had a very great knack of melding horror and humor. Some of his stories, are almost satires, and they have terrible things, and then they make you laugh. One of my favorite short stories of his is Enoch, and it features this death row inmate who's being interviewed by a lawyer, and he says, I got this demon on my shoulder. He's just telling me to do these bad things, and I don't know what to do. If I don't do what he says, he's driving me crazy. And the lawyer, because he's probably Harvard educated and smarter than everyone, says, you know what? Why don't you give him to me, the demon? I'll take him from you, and you'll be all right. And he says, oh, would you do that? Would you really do that? And he says, sure. So he gives him the demon, and it turns out there actually is a demon there. And this lawyer, now he's going crazy, and he's going to be the homicidal maniac. And I just thought, this is brilliant. It's brilliant. It's like a scenario that plays out in courthouses across, the continent every day. And, I just love that. And that's the kind of thing I wanted to aspire to. And you could argue that I did reach that because I did sell a story called The Rug to an anthology called Robert Bloch's Psychos, which Robert Bloch was going to be editing at the time for the Horror Writers Association. Unfortunately, he died before it was completed. And so I don't know if he actually read my story or not, but it was in there. And then it was nominated for a finalist for a Stoker Award the following year. So it's one of my proudest moments because, one of my idols, and then making it into a book that he was editing and capturing the flavor of his writing and everything, the humor and the horror. I think I captured it in there, and quite proud of that. So I don't even remember the question you're asking me. I'm just rambling on, but
it's fine. This is about you and what got you to write, and how do you like draw from a situation and turn it into something scary? Like, what did you read a lot of mythology as a kid? Did you watch the horror movies, or is it just something that just came to you?
I think it's more like it's something that just came to me. I did not read the mythology, and anytime I wrote a story about vampires or werewolves or any of those classic ghosts or everything, I would have to do some research, read up on it. Never was one for H.P. Lovecraft. Never bothered with the Cthulhu mythos story. I just thought it was kind of silly.
Well, you don't like putting the word cyclopean in every story?
Yeah, I kind of got the idea that every story was about the other worldly people breaking through and slithering through, and madness ensued, and then I don't know what happens after that, but it kind of didn't appeal to me. So, and I never tried to write one. I never, wanted to add to that mythos. That's fine. You can have your garden and play in it. So I didn't do a lot of mythology, things like that. But as I said, present day and a little bit of a twist, fantastic twist. Here, I'll give you a great example. It's a story called Rat Food. Now, if anyone hasn't read that story, that's the one that won the Stoker Award. So I'm going to give some spoilers here because there's a big twist at the end. But so I was working as a newspaper reporter with my friend David Nickel. He was a news editor. And we were talking about stories we were writing, stuff. And I said, yeah, I'm working on this story about this old lady she's feeding the rats so the rats don't come around when, people come over, like her family or the health inspector or the landlord. Because, if the house is infested with rats, they might want her out of there. So we said, okay. And then I said, but then she has a stroke, and then she's immobile and lying on the floor. And then the rats just, tear her apart because she's not feeding them anymore. So they feed off her.
Oh.
He goes, yeah, that's pretty good, right? That's good. That's on one level. Then David goes, what would be cool? If instead of the rats feeding on her, they start feeding her. They bring her food and start shoving it down her mouth while she's immobile and can't move. I thought, holy shit, that's even better. Because everything's leading up to this woman's going to be eaten alive by rats and they're unable to move. But then it's like, no, they're going to feed her. And one of them brings out like a candle and puts it in her mouth and, old rotting meat and with maggots on it. It was just, so that's where it came from. Like, let's get the modern day real life stuff and turn up the heat on it and see what happens. And that one was a terrific story. And it was just, I had the good idea and it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been that great a story. It would have been a good story. But there's that little bit of extra, like two people have that mindset. And the great writers have all of that in their one brain, but I needed two brains to get over the hump with that. But that's the kind of thing I like to do.
I've spoken to enough. A lot of authors have a great editor that they trust and bounce things off of and get great ideas from.
Well, Dave wasn't my editor. He was my co-writer, co-author. We combined on that. And it was funny because it's the only story I collaborated on. And he collaborated with a couple other guys. But at the time, computer and word processing software was really in its infancy, and I was using WordStar and he was using MS Word, I think. And we had a hard time, getting the file back and forth.
Yeah.
Ended up, we had to print it out and meet and then use a pencil, to make changes and stuff. Now it's the easiest thing, right? Just send it off. But back then, it was a real chore. But we managed.
Yeah, apparently, with success. I mean, maybe the time that took let things marinate, so to speak.
Well, that story, and you did mention editors. I'll relate this story. We were having trouble getting that story published, and one of the places we sent it to was an anthology series called Masks, edited by Jerry Williamson. People might know him better as J.N. Williamson. He did a bunch of paperback horror novels from the 80s and early 90s. And he didn't take it because he didn't really have a book lined up at the time. But he gave us like 3 or 4 pages of notes on how to improve the story. And we actually took him up on it. We utilized just about every suggestion that he made, and cut down where he said and added this or made those fine adjustments. We still didn't have a place to publish it, so we sent it to a Canadian magazine called On Spec, which is still being published. Like 30 30 years, 35, maybe 40 years later, it's still being published, so credit to them. And it was published in that magazine, which was a godsend, really, because it gave us an excuse to send the story to every member of the Horror Writers Association. That, oh, this was in a small Canadian magazine, you haven't seen it, so here I give you the chance to read it. And that was the best thing, because it was probably the one story that everybody in the Horror Writers Association had actually read. So, but that aside, I think it was a good story. It won. It didn't hurt that everyone got to read it, but after that, you got to have a good story to win. So there was.
It was a
good one.
Who was Death in Death Drives a Semi?
Who is Death?
I mean, what was your take on Death? I mean, it was.
Okay. So I related the story about the truck who seemingly had no driver.
Mm-hmm.
So the story was about an editor at the paper I was working at, Don Moore, who was close to retirement, quite overweight, and my thing was, what if Death passes you 3 times on the highway? If he passes you a 3rd time, he takes your soul. And driving at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 401, it's dead, so to speak.
Right.
And these tractor trailers, they come out of nowhere because there's no one on the road, and they're going at crazy speeds. So they'd always be passing you, and they don't just zoom by; they pass you really slowly, and every wheel you can see turning, and you hear it and everything. So I just thought, it's so annoying if they, passes you 3 times, he takes your life. And it's got built-in suspense because, it passes you once, you weren't paying attention. And then the second time he passes you, like, oh, this is getting serious. And then the 3rd time, it's like, oh, we're in a race. No, you're not getting me, And eventually the truck drives him off the road, and the truck goes off the road, the car goes off the road. And he's laughing because he cheated Death. He's still alive, in the ditch. The people are saying, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? He says, Death, he's in the truck. They go over and look in the truck, and there's nobody there. Like, what the hell are you talking about? There's nobody behind the wheel of this thing. So anyway, that was the whole story. And it all came because I looked up, the lights were on, but nobody was driving the truck. It seemed.
Right. I'm sure it was an optical illusion at the time. Now, who knows? It could be one of those experimental vehicles. Yeah, I mean, we're around the same age. I think that you have to be a few years older than me because it's at 36 now, the 25th anniversary. So, but, I remember, the road is freedom kind of thing that ultimately led into the Hitcher. You had Convoy and BJ and the Bear, and then you had like the Hitcher, sort of where you took the hitchhikers from being the ones you were afraid of to the truck driver that you were, afraid of, or a combination of both. But
well, it continues on from here. Let's continue on with this theme.
Okay.
So in 1998, Death Drives a Semi was included in my collection. Death Drives a Semi. That was the title story. So there was also 2 other stories in the book that had to do with truckers and driving. One was called Ice Bridge, and I can't recall the 3rd one. Anyway, so in addition to writing and publishing the books, part of your job at that time is actually to promote them and try to sell them. So I was looking for a place to promote Death Drives a Semi, and I came across this magazine called Truck News. And it would be distributed to truck shops, repair shops across Canada. And I learned that it had a circulation of about 80,000, which is quite good.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking through the magazine, and I see the editor-in-chief, John G. Smith. And I said, holy shit. He was a reporter at the Brampton Times when I was there. So I call him up, and I tell him I have this book, and maybe you can do something to help me out. He send me a copy of the book, he says. So I do. And his first thought was maybe he was going to reprint a couple of stories in the magazine. And that would be great because, that's part of the job that I was doing at the time. And after he read the book, he says, you know, we need the stories about trucking to be trucking industry positive, not having trucks go crazy and killing people and driving off the road and doing all those kind of things. And I said, okay, give me some time. So I came up with a former private investigator turned trucker, Mark Dalton, who finds his wife cheating on him and decides to sell everything he has, buys a truck, and hits the open road. That story, I thought, okay, I'll do 3 or 4 stories and that'll be it. That series went on for 15 years in Truck News Magazine. Every month there would be a chapter to a story. Every 3 months there would be a story, or 4 months. And in 15 years, I did 55 stories continuously during that time. It ended up that the page that the story was on would be sponsored by Michelin Tires. That went on for about 12 years. And then from that, a woman at Natural Resources Canada recognized how popular the series was. I was attending truck shows on behalf of Truck News. Truck drivers would come and say, oh, you know, I saw the magazine and they said the story was on page 42, but it was on page 60. And I'm like, okay, that happens, you know. But that's the level of interest that drivers had on this, because I had the trucking industry facts right. And people would say, oh, yeah, what happened to Mark, that happened to me, you know, or it happened to some guy I knew. So the woman at Natural Resources Canada said, maybe you could write a novel for us featuring the character and take this one-day seminar we have for truck drivers to teach them long-haul driving, fuel-efficient driving practices. And we'll take all the information, put it in the book, and then they don't have to come off the road to attend the course, and they can just read the book and learn it that way. So, okay, I'll do that. So I wrote a novel that started on the East Coast, went all the way to the West Coast, and they gave it away free to truckers, and it was used in colleges, teaching truck drivers, and it spawned 2 more. It did one where the characters went into the United States and did all their fuel-efficient stuff and eco things. And the last one, they sent me up to Northwest Territories to go on the ice roads, which was not, there's no fuel efficiency up in the far north. They turned their truck on in December 1st and they leave it running till March 1st. You know, they never shut it off, because if you shut it off, things are going to get frozen, hard to start, big problem. But anyway, I digress. I did 55 stories, 15 years, 3 novels for the Canadian government, and 20 of the stories were incorporated in 2 audiobook collections by Graphic Audio. So that all stemmed from Death Drives a Semi.
Well, Mark Dalton, the character, yes. I mean, there's no way it got that popular just because he was practicing safe driving and accurate trucking practice.
No, the 55 stories, he would get into all, he couldn't keep his nose out of other people's business, right?
So it was like The Wanderer, like Jack Reacher, or
lost children and guys stealing fuel and, you know, road rage and, you know, killers on the loose escaped and on the highway. And I'll give you an example of this too. I was in New Brunswick. That was the Canadian government sent me there. I was in New Brunswick, signing copies of the book. And, you know, this Acadian truck driver, he comes up to me and says, oh, so you're Mark Dalton, eh? And I said, no, I'm the guy who wrote the stories. Mark Dalton's a character. I'm the author. I wrote about the character. He goes, hey, Mark, remember that time that prostitute stole all your money? And I said, no, that wasn't me. That's the character. I'm the author. And then in the end, I just said, yeah, that was a bad time.
Yeah, that was a bad day.
Yeah, I couldn't explain to him, you know, but that's the level that the drivers, they really enjoyed it. And that was one of the most fulfilling things, although at the end of the career, there's no books or anything to show for it, but it was a long time, and the money was professional rates. And I even did another graphic story for them that appeared monthly in the last 3 years. So I was doing a lot of writing for them. And you would think, oh, I'm a truck driver. But I just had, anytime I needed information about truck driving, I'd ask somebody, or they'd put me in touch with somebody, like filing taxes for a trucker, or I can't even remember. There's 55 stories. There's quite a bit of them. And I covered just about everything I could think of in terms of trucking.
Right. Turn the bank loan process into an adventure story. That's a challenge.
Well, I turned filing your taxes as a truck driver into a story, and you do your best to make these things interesting. And it lasted for 15 years. I was amazed, shocked by that. I mean,
bill of lading, freight on board, risk of loss.
Yeah. Bills of lading and things like that. You got to have the right paperwork. And I did a story about crossing the border and like a bad border guard just trying to find something wrong and things like that. Yeah, I did a lot of anything I could think of, because after a while it was hard to find something I hadn't done.
The broken toll booth. It's a trap.
No, he always had a cell phone. Wasn't never without a cell phone. But then he had problems with his dispatcher and things like that. So
that was more modern. All right. See, I was back in the 70s with and like 81, like BJ McKay and and just CB radios.
BJ and the Bear, yeah. You would have made an interesting, and it could still make an interesting television show. But what am I doing?
I don't. Well, Jack Reacher, it's basically the same kind of thing. The wanderer goes into every town and finds trouble and takes care of trouble.
Well, I must say, I haven't seen the Reacher series, but I watch all the clips on YouTube that I can see. And the guy playing Reacher now, I just think he's great. And I can't believe that anyone could believe that Tom Cruise could play that part.
I know
how tall Tom Cruise is.
well, the only one who had to believe it was Tom Cruise, because it's his studio, so he bought all the rights to it. About that.
Yeah. So but, from what I understand of the character Jack Reacher, he's like this huge guy, and just they can't put tall actresses near Tom Cruise because then he looks as short as he is.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. Hey, he's got the cool factor going. It's cool.
Sure. He's been a movie star.
Imposing.
Yeah. I mean, he's been a movie star.
Physically imposing.
No, well, this guy is.
Anyway, we're digressing.
That's true. We are.
Sort of like going into town and always sticking your nose in other people's business and things like that. It was fun. It's over now.
So how do we get from Canadian trucking best practices and American trucker best practices to Sarah Michelle Gellar and sort of something from the Vampire Diaries or Supernatural world?
Well, the trucking thing was because of my efforts to try, promote the book, and it came from that. Wolfpack, I had nothing to do with the television series coming about. I wrote the first Wolfpack novel in 2004, and it did very well at the time. It won the Aurora Award for Best Long Form in English, and it also won the Silver Birch Award, which is a very prestigious award and pretty tough to win. I'll explain that for a second.
Sure.
The Silver Birch Award is presented by the Ontario Library Association. So every year they'll come out with a list of 10 books for elementary school kids to read. And if they read 5 of them, then they can vote for their favorite. And that year, Wolfpack was an overwhelming favorite and won by a very large margin. But the good thing about the Silver Birch Award, just to be on the list, you have to have 5,000 copies in print. So as soon as it got named to the list, they went into a second printing. And by the time that the award cycle was finished, it had gone through a third printing. So that was great. And The award ceremony was down by the lake in an arena with 2,000 kids there. They bust them in, come on stage, and they're just your book's over their head, and they're screaming your name. And I swear to God, it felt like a rock star. It was incredible. So anyway, sold 10,000 copies of the first book, won the award. That's great. 3 more books in the series, each one selling infinitely less, 1,000 copies each, and then it just petered out. And then, by 2010, the whole series is out of print, and that's it. I had your run and everything. But I will say this, when the first book came out, there were 2 people interested in film television rights for it. One had been an associate producer for the Survivor television series, and the other one said he had a development deal with Paramount Pictures. Okay, fantastic. It was exciting for a while, and then I didn't hear another word from either of them ever again. That's it. So that kind of jaded my perspective on Hollywood interest in my work, because it had happened other times too. Mm-hmm. People come around, they're saying nice things, we want to do this, we want to do that, then you never hear from them again. So one Friday in 2022, sitting at the kitchen table, my wife's making dinner, I get an email from my agent. Oh, there's someone interested with film television rights for Wolfpack. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay, just, we'll entertain them. And, a couple of weeks, there was a real offer with money. Okay, we'll sign it. I don't think anything's going to happen. 4 months later, a press release comes, and they wanted my approval, and I'm looking, and I think, whatever. Even though it said, all the people's email addresses said CBS Viacom, I just thought, this is, nothing's going to happen. And then 2 days after that, there was a teaser trailer put out, and Jeff Davis of the Criminal Minds fame and Teen Wolf was going to do a Teen Wolf movie. And then also in 2022, all new series, Wolfpack, based on the acclaimed books by Edo Van Belkhom. And I thought, holy shit, this might happen.
Yeah.
This might happen. And I also thought, these guys are crazy. The acclaimed books, they've been out of print for 10 years. Like, what are you talking about? So anyway, I just thinking, maybe this is going to happen. And then a couple months later, first day of shooting, holy shit, it is going to happen. 6 months later, we were down in Atlanta on the set, meeting all these people. And then 3 months later, we were in Los Angeles for the premiere at the Harmony Gold Theater. Like, this is a big deal. This is incredible. I've said this many times. I said, how many times in your life do you get to say something like this to your wife? How would you like to come with me to Los Angeles and walk on the red carpet? Yeah. Never is the answer. Right. And I was able to do that. And I'm like, holy shit, this is fantastic. So by every measure, the series was a hit. Rating-wise and viewers and subscriptions and everything, Paramount Plus. Then what happened? Well, the writers went on strike, the Writers Guild of America.
Right.
And while that one finished, then the actors were on strike. The net result was like 8 months of nothing happening. But even while the strikes were going on, I was told by Jeff Davis that the series had been greenlit for season 2. And it was all good. It was getting down to the wire when they were talking about starting filming, and the series had been registered with the Writers Guild, so it was like in a production. And they started sending out contracts to all the actors. And then he got a call saying, no, we're canceling the series. The idea was there was too long between first and second season. It was going to be 2 years, right? And they didn't want to have to promote it all over again. Plus, Paramount Plus is kind of up for sale, and they're not sure whether they're going to sell or continue on or merge or whatever. So I don't think they had the appetite to finance another season of the show. And it kind of died right there. So it wasn't a failure. It was a hit. But I always make the joke that, the pinnacle of my writing career, I got screwed over by other writers.
Right.
By going on strike.
Well,
which is funny. It's kind of true.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it is. With Paramount, you just have to say Wolfpack, a Yellowstone story, and you'll get greenlit. So,
Well, it wasn't quite up there with like Yellowstone and Tulsa King or whatever, or the other one with Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, the prison one, the King of something, Pittsville or whatever, something.
So it was up there with their top shows, just not the top show. And I was thinking that with Sarah Michelle Gellar on board, there's no way they're going to cancel it, because to get that demographic, something to appeal to them, plus get all the hype and momentum that she brought to the production, would be impossible. But I guess, they had different ideas.
Well, that is a shame. It sounds like you did a lot of youth fiction, which doesn't really seem like that was your origin.
Well, I'll tell you how that came about too. I got a story for everything I've ever done. So, I was writing adult stuff, of course. I did a bunch of novels. I did 4 role-playing game novels. Then I did Martyrs. And I did Teeth. Then I finally made it into paperback, mass market paperback with Scream Queen and Blood Road. But when you make it into mass market paperback, then you got to worry about how much you're selling, because that's what it's about then. And for some reason, the books didn't sell all that well, or didn't make it into the stores, or who knows what. So my wife says, you should try doing work for young readers. And I had sold a story to a fantasy or science fiction and fantasy anthology called What If, edited by Monica Hughes, Canadian science fiction writer for young adults. So when I did that, then I pitched the publisher, said, what you need is a companion piece of horror stories to go with that one. And at the time, we were going to call it, What Was That? So What If, What Was That?
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it was called Be Afraid. And so I edited this book, and it was about teenage problems with a horror twist, right? And I wanted every story to be about teenagers with their kind of problems, but with a horrific twist. And even though I'd never edited a book before or hadn't done any young adult work per se, the book was a Canadian Library Association Young Adult Book of the Year, I believe. And so whatever my instincts were, they were correct. And I did a second one called Be Very Afraid. And I always tell the joke, the first one was called Be Afraid. The second one was Be Very Afraid. I pitched a third one called Shit Your Pants, but the publisher didn't go for it. So I ended up writing a novel of my own. And that was Wolfpack. And, I managed to get four books out of it, and it was quite successful. And then, even that dried up and things happened. But that's how that came about. I had no intention when I started writing for young adults, but when I was going to write for young adults, I decided I'm going to write a story that I would like to read if I was that age. And I knew it had to be kind of simple, and no one died. Not a lot of blood is spilled, hardly any, I don't think. And, all of those things. And again, it was just my instincts on what would be the right thing. And ended up to be the right thing, and it worked out really well.
Are you your own manager?
Yeah, it sounds like I'm a wheeler dealer and, got all these things going on. But, when you're a full-time writer and your job is to produce work and then sell it and then find people to publish it and to do more books, that's what you wake up and say, what am I going to do today? And you figure out a way to sell another thing or another book or sell a story to this guy or that guy. And it's a hustle. And to be honest, I did it for 12 years. And at the end of that, I was kind of burnt out because it it was fun, and it's fun when you're successful at it. But when things start to fall and not go your way, it's very difficult. And I got to the point where there's a saying, an expression in writing circles, and in all artistic circles. It says, it's okay for me to suffer for my art, but it's not all right for all the people around me to have to suffer for my art.
Right.
So I had a son, I had a wife, she was working, I was working at home as a writer, and if things weren't going well, and I wasn't pulling my share, other people were suffering so I could play at being this famous writer. So at some point I decided, you know what, I got to get a job that has a pension and a benefits package. And the idea was I'll still keep writing and working. And so I did take on a job, and that was 20 years ago. And if all of those things, like the TV series, if that had happened 20 years ago, I probably still would be writing, right? Because that would have been that carrot that dangled and I caught it. And then it would be, where's the next one? And I would be pursuing it. But it just came out of nowhere. And, 20 years too late. It would have encouraged me to continue on and go through it. But I have no regrets.
Do you own your copyrights and any trademarks if applicable?
Yeah, well, yes. But I did a bunch of things that were work for hire.
Right.
And I don't know if you work for hire, if you know, or your listeners know. When you do work for hire, it's somebody else's property. And you're just getting paid to provide them with work in their universe.
What about the Mark Dalton or the Wolfpack stuff?
No, that's all mine, sure. But I want to continue on this thought.
Sure.
So I did the 4 role-playing game books, one of which I thought was really good, Mr. Magic, and it got canceled and then included in this omnibus, which it kind of got lost. So I did those books. I also did 2 books in the Deathland series. James Axler, the Harlequin Gold Eagle series, Deathlands. Some would call it Men's Action Adventure. Some call it War Porn. I did 2 books in that series. And that was just for the money. It was a set fee. They wanted 90,000 words. So what I did was I wrote 1,000 words a day for 90 days. And when 90 days was up, I was finished. I handed it to them. Never had to think about the book again, which is a benefit. You didn't have to work past that. But at this point, I can't point that book out and say, oh, that's my work. I can do that, but no one's going to be impressed with that. It doesn't have my name on it. It's not an original work by me. But all the other stuff, yeah. Dalton series, Wolfpack, it's all by copyright. Although, Paramount Plus now owns that series in terms of television and film. Mm-hmm. I've got nothing to do with it anymore. My fantasy is that about 5 years down the road, they'll decide, oh, you know what? We can make an animated kids series out of this. It'd be perfect. And I thought, yeah, that'll be great. But that's just me talking. Who knows what they've got in store. They had plans for it when it was a hot property in the suit. The episodes were streaming. But I don't know. I still own all that. The books I still own.
Well, things are cyclical. There was the whole Twilight phase and all of that. And, hey, X-Men 97 just came out. It's not 1997 last I checked. So there's always a chance.
The thing I could have hoped for was that Wolfpack was the basis for the Teen Wolf series and not Teen Wolf, because I wrote in 2004, Teen Wolf came out, and the series came out in like 2011. Would have been perfect timing. And then I could have had 100 episodes over 6 seasons of Wolfpack, and those books would be, there'd probably be more than 4 by now. But, you sometimes think about these things. Oh, if only, what if?
Of course.
And, it's fun, but it's also depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been great, but it didn't happen.
All right. So, but the short story compendium, that's being reissued, and that's being republished and promulgated now. So, somebody wanted to get your work out there again and get you to a new audience.
Well, that is true, and I'll tell you the story how this came about. So, when Wolfpack was at the height of its powers, and the series was going on, and I was doing a lot of blogs and interviews like this about Wolfpack, and one of them I did was with Mark Leslie Lefebvre, who had a podcast, and he interviewed me about it, and he also said, when we were done, he says, Death Drives a Semi, it's you should think about reprinting it, because he had he has a company that does print-on-demand books and stuff like that called Start Publishing. He said, you should, reissue it. And I thought, okay, I don't know. I'll think about it. And I wasn't really thinking in terms of that. But after a few months, I thought, it would be really cool to reissue that. And that's the way it came. I went back to him. I said, I want to do it. And it was an organic thing that he really thought highly of the book when it first came out. He was a bookseller then, and he steered a lot of people towards the book. And it was an inspiration to him in his writing career. So he wanted to see it reprinted. And that, wasn't any pushing by me. I didn't, twist anybody's arm. He came to me about it, and I thought, that's the way it should be. Somebody has a vision or thinks enough about this that they want to do something about it. That's where it should come from. We're not thinking about we're going to make some money on it. We're not going to do anything else. This is an important book. It's a really good book. It deserves another shot at life. So that's how it came about. So we did it, 25th anniversary, and it was a lot of fun too. We updated the book. The cover got a really cool upgrade. I did story notes for all the stories. And my original edition, I had the picture of me in a truck, right? So we did the 25th anniversary picture, me in a truck again, but I've got this white beard and almost no hair left. And, so my thing was, nothing has changed about the book except the author. All the stories are still the same. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And my hope is that the book does well enough that we can do another collection with Mark, because I do have enough truly good stories to put in another collection, which, I lost interest back in the day, but now I have interest in doing it again. I think in the next year or two, maybe we'll do that. Especially, I'll mention this. The story that opens up Death Drives a Semi, it's called The Rug. And a couple of weeks ago, I was approached by Canadian filmmaker Sean Cisterna of Mythic Productions, who got a grant from the Canadian government to work with senior citizens. And what he's going to do is have them work behind the scenes on the production of this short film based on the story. So in May, we're going to do 2 days of shooting the story. And I read the script he wrote sticks very closely to the story, which didn't happen in Wolfpack, by the way. I wrote a family drama. It turned out in a supernatural mystery with lots of sex and stuff and lots of violence and people getting killed. So it changed completely, but this one is going to stick very close to the story. And it'll be I joke around. I said, I'll be able to act like a big shot for another year and a half while, they're making a movie of one of my stories. We'll go to some film festivals, and I'll be able to do events where I read the story and then show the film and answer questions. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, if this had happened 20 years ago, I might still be writing, but it's happening now, better late than never, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like you're still having fun with it. It sounds like you've got the grounded attitude, and if a couple things hit right, then it could have been something. But at the same time, you got lucky in other places. Your friend was the editor of a magazine. You worked with somebody else somewhere. So luck comes when it comes. And
you're pointing towards luck, and that's very important because those things were lucky. But, and I say this when I do talks on writing all the time, there are three things that contribute to eventual success in the arts. And the easy one is talent and persistence. So, because you only need really two of the three things. You can have talent and persist and finally get to where you want to go. But the third one is, people usually don't think of it, and that is luck. Talent, luck, and persistence. So I like this especially because you can succeed without any talent. If you persist long enough and get lucky, you can have eventual success. So any two of the three. So you're pointing out that, yeah, it's lucky that my friend that I worked with edits the magazine, but I still had to write a good story and have a good book to present to him. And then I had to produce 55 short stories over 15 years that the readers enjoyed and advertisers were willing to sponsor. So luck is very important, but you still have to produce. It's like anybody who knows somebody to get a job. That's how you get the job. You keep the job by doing,
right,
what you're supposed to do and a good job at it. So, even when Wolfpack when I was approached about the television series, I was telling people all the time, yeah, it was like getting struck by lightning and winning the lottery in the very same day. And I was saying that for a long time. And then family and friends came to me and said, you shouldn't be talking about it that way. Because the way you say it, it's like you didn't have anything to do with it. It was all this external stuff. You had to write a good book. And someone had to recognize that along the way. And then you got lucky with it. So, and I came to terms with that. I said, okay, that sounds reasonable. And I'll take that I had something to do with it, of course. But talent, luck, and perseverance, very key elements. Only two are absolutely necessary to succeed. Which two depends on whoever it is.
It just depends on how lucky you are. But there's some saying, and of course it escapes me now, but something about success is the intersection of persistence and timing, or something like that.
Yeah. It's all similar. That the idea is the same. It's just how you coat it and doll it up, put lipstick on it. But the idea is exactly the same. You work hard at something, eventually you're going to be in the right place at the right time.
Well, it strikes me as we're talking on a podcast about something that is geared to truckers, especially, not exclusively, but especially, that maybe the Dalton stories in a podcast form is something where they can have a new life and be enjoyed by the truckers while they're driving.
Well, Graphic Audio did think that, and they did two collections. One was called Highway Robbery and Other Stories, and the other one was called Reefer Madness and Other Stories. Each one had 10 stories. The first 10 stories was in one. The 11th to 20th story was in the second. And I thought this was the perfect match, and they must have thought so early on too. But once you get into that situation, it's all about sales, right? So the sales must not have been there, although some people said it was their favorite series, whatever. But clearly, if the sales were there, it would have been different. I think part of the problem with that is Graphic Audio does multi-character, multi-voice sound effects, music, and everything. And when you're doing a thing that has 10 different stories, you got to come up with actors and guidance and things 10 different times, as opposed to a novel where all those characters are going to go all the way through the novel. So I think the idea was good, but it just took a little bit too much work to pull off, and it wasn't worth their while. That's what I would guess. If the sales were phenomenal, they'll do anything to keep it going. But I think, sales weren't enough to justify continuing on with the series. But you had the same idea they did. I had that idea, and this didn't pan out. Maybe someone else has come along and figure out the way to do it right, but we gave it a try.
You never know. All right, this is a note to the audience, not to anyone else. This is probably going to come out as a Garden Views, not a Garden of Doom. So when you heard Garden of Doom and you're seeing it on Garden Views, this is just one of my editorial decisions, and just to tell Edo, it's just Garden Views. This is more of your writer's story, your writer's tale, and more grounded. Garden of Doom would be if we were getting really more into the horror and the stuff of it. So, I'm the only one who knows when something feels right in one and the other, and it really makes no difference because they're both on the same feed and listened to by the same people. But so that's that. Just getting that little house cleaning out of the way. All right, where can people find the book? Is it on Amazon? Is it in bookstores? Are you going to be doing a tour?
No tours, but you type in my name, Edo Van Belkhom, Death Drives a Semi. A bunch of places are going to pop up. I always say I'm on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I got an account on Threads. I don't use that yet, but You'll see. And I say, if you can't find me, you're not looking hard enough, because all it takes is, type in my name and there it is. I would point to YouTube. I have a channel there, and I have all kinds of crazy stuff on there. Like, I used to be a horror movie host on Scream TV. So there's a bunch of those intros there. I did some Saturday morning horror spots for WUTV in Buffalo. 2 years that they aired around Halloween. Some spots I did on talk shows where I was guest and stuff. So type in Edo Van Belkhom at YouTube. And there's also Wolfpack Facts there, I must say. There's 4 episodes of Wolfpack Facts where I talk about the series and how they compare to the books. So that's where you go. Death Drives a Semi at all the best booksellers. It's available. And I will say that Wolfpack is available in print form right now. All 4 books are available in audiobook, but 2, 3, and 4, Lone Wolf, Cry Wolf, and Wolf Man, by the end of this year will all be available in print. Of course, we were anticipating a second season. Let's put all the books back in print, and now the season's been canceled. But, that's a big semi-truck coming down the highway. You can't stop those books from coming out. So they'll be out all in print form the rest of the year. And also, I did an essay called Wolfpack Page to Screen, where it's a 6,000-word essay about how the books ended up on TV and everything along those lines. And that's in the last book, so a little something new for that. But that's where you can find it. It's all out there.
Well, fans of the series, learn to read. You can read the books, and you can enjoy the series in your own head. And so you can...
Well, they'll find out that the series is quite different from the books are quite different from the TV show. Some people have said they're better. Some are disappointed that, Sarah Michelle Gellar's character isn't even in the books.
Oh, well.
There's all kinds of things like that. If you're saying, people are asking me, if I read the second book, will I know what happens in season 2? And I said, no, it's the inspiration for the series. It's not the guidebook to what's happening in season 3 and 4. But the books are out there, and I'm proud of my work. So hopefully, if people are drawn towards them because of the series, hopefully they're not too disappointed. It's not exactly like it, but I did the best I could with it.
Well, you know what? When they're reading it and they're envisioning things in their head, they can cast Sarah Michelle Gellar in a different role, and they can still enjoy her work in the book. And that's probably where I'm going to stop myself right there. It's one of the great things of being a reader is you can put whatever voices or faces on the characters that you like, and you don't have to stick by one, because as long as it makes sense to you while you're reading it. So. Anyway, it sounds like it's not quite done yet. There's still chances. You never know if things are old or new again. But you've made a thing of it. You were what they call a working writer. Go ahead.
My favorite time for the whole Wolfpack thing is like a year and a half of the most fun I've ever had in my life. So. I'm looking forward to the short film. Maybe we can continue that for another year or so. But I have no regrets, and I'm thankful to Jeff Davis for saying yes. And making the series, and it was a great ride. Like, my wife says oftentimes, the roller coaster is fun. It's more fun than the merry-go-round. And, the writing life is that. It's a roller coaster. One day you're wondering, what am I going to do to make some money? And the other one is, then 1 year you're like, I got to pay what in taxes? So...
Right. Nobody took my withholdings.
It is a roller coaster. I wish I had more years like that, but I did have 1 year like that. Like, are you kidding me?
What's your favorite horror book?
My favorite horror book? A single book. Well...
Or property. It doesn't have to be limited to one book.
The October Country is my inspiration, and there's a bunch of... you can't see it because we're not doing a video, but behind me there's a whole bookshelf full of all my favorite books, paperbacks. And I've got just about everything that Barbara Block ever did, most of the stuff Richard Matheson did. I did finish reading a collection by Jack Ketchum, more contemporary horror author. Really, really good writer. Some of the stories in there were really... You could just admire the style and technique and the skill and talent when he puts it all together. I must say there were 30 stories in there, and by the end of it, I was getting like, oh man, this is another one like that other one. But quite happy with reading his stuff. Dennis Etchison was another contemporary writer. Joe R. Lansdale, really, really terrific writer out of East Texas. All these people used to be splatter punks and that back in the day, but all quite skilled writers, and I enjoy reading all of them.
Okay, very good. I just finished reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Not exactly horror, but not exactly not at the same time.
Yeah, he's been recommended to me a couple of times, but I haven't read anything by him yet.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. It's sort of...
read everything.
No, of course not. I would describe it as sort of a blending of Lovecraft language with Larry McMurtry tones, if that makes any sense.
I can see that.
I wanted to, since I just finished it, I've got like questions I want to bounce off something if I'm seeing things right, but you didn't read it, so I can't ask you those questions. But if you do read it, think of me. I want to know if you think that the judge is actually like a representation of the land, and if the kid is the representation of Americans, the population, the sort of your white colonist manifest destiny population. So, anyway, so just
keep all that in mind.
Right, of course. I'm sure you will. Have you ever read Jeff Long's The Descent?
I have not.
Okay, that's my favorite horror book. All right, well, all right, that's good. The good news is you don't have to talk to me about Jeff Long's The Descent for 40 minutes or longer, because I could talk about that forever. I don't know. So you said that they should type in your name. I think I should spell it since it's audio. It's Edo Van Belkhom, Belkom. It'll also be in the show notes, of course. But in podcasts, I don't think most people read the show notes. So I think I should spell it for them. And, great luck with the 25-year anniversary of the book and its re-release, and hope good things come from that. And I hope that, that your roller coaster starts going back in the wee phase.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me, too.
My pleasure. All right, everyone, thanks for listening. Check out his stuff. Check out his YouTube channel, and then buy the book, of course. And you can also give us a 5-star review and rating, rather, and a nice little review and all the other good stuff. Hit like and subscribe and all the referrals. And you'll hear from us next week.
Thank you.